Tuấn, a 13-year-old boy, had learned the meaning of loss and loneliness far too soon. 2 years ago, his parents perished in a devastating landslide, leaving him alone in the world with no family, no home. He built a makeshift rickety hut by the riverbank where the water flowed silently, much like the relentless passage of time, never pausing, never waiting for anyone. By that riverbank, Tuán's life was a never-ending struggle. Each day he waded through the thick mud, scavenging for broken clamshells and tattered plastic cans, exchanging them for a few coins, just enough to buy a handful of rice to survive. His small, frail figure was almost invisible amidst the dense reeds and the murky river, yet his eyes, though shadowed with sorrow, held an uncommon determination. His thin hands tirelessly sifted through scattered trash, not just for survival, but as if clinging to a fragile sliver of hope in this cold, unyielding world. He wished for nothing grand, only a full meal, a night without shivering, and a peaceful sleep. But on that fateful evening, his destiny changed. The sky darkened abruptly as heavy clouds swallowed the light. Raindrops began to fall, first in sparse, hesitant drips, then in torrents, cascading like a waterfall. Even as his clothes became drenched, Tuán did not stop his work. The river now resembled a monstrous beast, growling and churning with angry, muddy waves. Then, amidst the downpour and the howling wind, he heard it, a faint, fragile sound, a cry for help, barely audible, buried within the raging storm. Tuán paused, tilting his ear to listen, his heart pounding hard in his small chest. The sound grew clearer now, a faint, broken cry that sent a shiver through him. He looked around, eyes wide with both fear and curiosity. Amid the blinding rain and swaying reeds in the wind, the cry seemed to beckon him toward a clump of trees by the riverbank. Without hesitation, Tuán hurried toward it. His bare feet sank into the cold, muddy ground. Rain lashed at his face, but he pressed on. The crying grew louder, as if urging him forward. At last, beneath the dense thicket, he spotted a small, weathered basket tilting among the reeds. Tuán approached, his trembling hands pulling the basket from the wet grass. Inside, a newborn boy lay curled up, his tiny body shivering from the cold. The thin blanket wrapped around him was soaked through, his face pale, lips purple like a fading flame. His minuscule hands grasped at the air. But what stunned Tuán was the tiny silver bracelet on the baby's wrist. Under the dim light filtering through the gloomy sky, it glimmered like a lone star in the dark night. Tuán's heart tightened. Who could be so heartless as to abandon this child in such a merciless storm? In that moment, amidst the relentless downpour and biting wind, Tuán did not stop to think. He hurriedly took off his tattered shirt, wrapped it around the shivering baby, and held the child close as he rushed toward his rickety hut, the only place that could offer even the slightest warmth. As he looked down at the fragile life in his arms, Tuán made a silent vow. No matter how harsh poverty and hardship might be, he would do everything in his power to protect this tiny soul. In the darkness of his own existence, the child's presence was like a flickering light, small, yet undeniably beautiful. The rain continued to fall, but within Tuán, a fire had been lit. He named the baby On, a name chosen with all the fragile hope he had for a better future. As he whispered it softly, it felt as though he was entrusting the name with all the things he himself had never known. Peace, a home, and love. But peace had never come easily, not for Tuán, and certainly not for the small child who had just entered his life. The first days of caring for Anne were an endless series of challenges. Tuán, who had long grown accustomed to his own harsh life, now bore the added burden of protecting another. At dawn, when the sky was still cloaked in darkness and the cold mist hung heavy, he left the hut and waded through the muddy waters of the river, searching for broken glass shards and discarded plastic cans to exchange for a few coins. The meager earnings of the day might only be enough to buy a small can of milk or a thin diaper. But Tuán never let himself stop. Each time he bent down to pick up scrap, the image of Anne's wide, weak eyes surfaced in his mind, giving him strength to keep going. At night, after an exhausting day, Tuán returned to his fragile little hut. Under the dim, flickering glow of an oil lamp swaying in the wind, he quietly held Anne close, offering warmth in a world that had always been so cold. Tuán gently laid Anne down on the worn-out mat, carefully changing the baby's diaper and wiping his tiny body with an old cloth. On rainy nights, the wind howled through the gaps in the metal roof, like invisible threats whispering in the dark. The tattered hut was barely enough to keep out the cold and rain, but Tuán had no other choice. He took off his own ragged shirt, wrapped it around Anne, and held him close, his final shield against the unforgiving night. He lulled the baby to sleep with the same songs his mother once sang, melodies that had once been soothing but now carried an unbearable sorrow. And sleep now, you'll be alright, he whispered, though deep down, he wasn't sure if the promise would ever come true. But some nights, no amount of effort could make a difference, and cried endlessly, his voice small yet piercing, cutting into Tuan's heart like a blade. He rocked the makeshift cradle, fashioned from old fabric, trying to comfort him, but the cries persisted, a haunting reminder that life had never been easy. At times, Tuan could only sit in silence, watching Anne as quiet tears traced paths down his dirt-streaked face. Yet even when the weight in his heart felt unbearable, he reminded himself he had to keep going. Anne needed him. One morning, as the soft sunlight filtered through the mist, Tuan carefully wiped Anne's delicate skin. His small fingers brushed against the baby's wrist and suddenly froze. There, on Anne's tiny hand, a silver bracelet gleamed faintly in the morning light. Tuan gently turned the bracelet in his hands, his eyes tracing the intricate patterns etched onto its surface. A mysterious symbol, a delicate lotus flower intertwined with elegantly curved lines. The bracelet was anything but ordinary, as if it belonged to a world far removed from the harsh reality Tuan had always known. He stared at it for a long while, countless unanswered questions stirring in his heart. Where did this bracelet come from? Who had placed it on Anne's wrist? And why had such a tiny child been abandoned in such cruel circumstances? A vague yet unshakable feeling welled up inside Tuan. That Anne was no ordinary child, that their journey would not end here. The bracelet felt like a sign, a reminder that he was stepping into a story far greater than his own. Carefully, he held onto it, his grip firm yet gentle, as if afraid it might vanish. Though the questions gnawed at his mind, Tuan knew one thing for certain. None of them mattered as much as protecting An, the little brother he had poured his entire heart into. Outside, the wind whispered as if carrying secrets meant only for those who dared to listen. But with quiet determination and unwavering resolve, Tuan simply held on close, bracing himself for the challenges that lay ahead. That night, the sky hung heavy, the bitter wind seeping through every gap in their fragile shelter, carrying dampness that made the air even more stifling. Tuan sat beside the makeshift cradle, gently rocking it back and forth, trying to soothe the tiny child he had rescued from the freezing river. But tonight, unlike other nights, An did not sleep peacefully. An's tiny face was flushed red, his breathing shallow and labored. Soft whimpers escaped his lips, fragile cries for help. Tuan placed a hand on his forehead and immediately pulled back. His skin was burning hot. "And just hold on a little longer," he whispered, his voice trembling with fear. Without another thought, Tuan hastily wrapped Anne in the only thin jacket he owned and rushed out of the tent into the pitch black night. Rain began to pour down, heavy droplets lashing against his face like icy daggers. His bare feet pounded against the muddy road, each step splashing cold water and dirt into the air. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps, but his arms held him tightly, desperate to preserve whatever warmth the child had left. "You have to make it through this," he kept repeating, his words barely audible over the roaring storm, an almost helpless prayer cast into the darkness. At last, the small roadside clinic appeared in sight. Tuan pushed open the door and stumbled inside, water dripping from his soaked clothes and hair onto the freezing floor. "Doctor, please save my little brother," he cried, his voice hoarse. He lifted N up, his eyes pleading. An elderly doctor rushed over, swiftly taking N from Tuan's arms and carrying him to the examination table. Tuan stood frozen in place, his legs barely able to hold him up, yet he refused to look away from An for even a second. As the doctor unwrapped the thin blanket around An, his gaze suddenly stopped. His hands, steady just moments ago, now trembled as they hovered over the child's wrist. Under the dim clinic light, a silver bracelet gleamed. "This bracelet," the doctor murmured, his eyes widening in shock. "Stop." With careful, almost reverent hands, he turned his wrist, tracing the delicate engravings on the silver band. A lotus flower, beautifully intertwined with intricate swirling patterns. "This bracelet belongs to the Huang family," the doctor spoke, his voice catching with emotion. Tuan stood frozen, his mind blank. The Ho family? He didn't understand what was happening. Ho and Madame Mai? They lost their infant son months ago in a kidnapping. This is their family heirloom. There's no mistaking it. The words struck Tuan like a bolt of lightning. His gaze fell to the silver bracelet on An's tiny wrist, his heart pounding with unanswered questions. And the child he had protected all this time was actually the son of a wealthy, influential family? Why had he been abandoned by the river that night? What had really happened? And now, if his family came for him, would Tuan have to let him go? An unspoken fear gripped Tuan's chest. Yet he said nothing, only holding An tighter, his eyes filled with love and worry. Within hours, the news had reached the Huang family. A luxurious car sped toward the clinic, its headlights piercing through the rain and illuminating the small yard. Tuan stood in the corner of the room, clutching Anne close, his heart in turmoil. The car door opened. A woman with an elegant posture but a weary face stepped inside, followed by a tall man with a stern expression, though his eyes shone with worry. Madame Mai stopped abruptly when she saw Anne. A strangled sob escaped her lips. "It's him! It's my son!" She rushed forward, her trembling hands cupping the child's tiny face. Tears streamed down her cheeks, falling onto Anne's soft skin, mixing with the lingering rain. Mr. Ong Huang stepped closer, his hand gently resting on his wife's shoulder. His voice, deep and steady, wavered with emotion. "It's really him. We finally found our son." Tuan stood still, frozen in place. He watched as Madame Mai held and tightly, as if she had just found the most precious treasure in the world. The sight sent a sharp pain through Tuan's chest, an ache both hollow and overwhelming. Little Anne, the child Tuan had cherished as his own brother, the one he had given everything to protect, now belonged to a different world, a world Tuan had never known. Madame Mai turned to Tuan, her eyes brimming with tears, yet filled with immense gratitude. "It was you. You were the one who saved my son, weren't you?" Her voice trembled, but each word carried deep sincerity. "Thank you. Thank you for keeping him safe." Tuan wanted to say something, anything, but the words refused to leave his throat. He simply bowed his head, arms still wrapped around Anne, unwilling to let go. Gently, Madame Mai reached out, waiting to take her son. Tuan hesitated. His heart screamed in protest, but his hands, shaking, slowly released the child he loved most into her embrace. The car pulled away, taking Anne farther and farther into the distance. Tuan remained standing there, alone in the freezing rain. Silent tears rolled down his face, blending with the raindrops falling endlessly from the sky. That night, Tuan returned to his empty shelter, feeling as though a part of his soul had been taken away. After reuniting with their son, the Ong Hong family was not only deeply grateful, but also burdened with an undeniable debt of kindness toward Tuan. They could not stop thinking about the hardships he had endured to protect Anne while they, his birth parents, had been powerless to find him. "We cannot take back our son and leave this boy behind," Madame Mai said to her husband, her voice choked with emotion. With that determination, they made a decision, one that would change everything. They offered to adopt Tuan, hoping to give him a new life, a life of peace, warmth, and belonging. When the offer was made, Tuan was speechless. He was overwhelmed, uncertain if he could ever fit into their world. The love, the gratitude that Mr. Huang and Madame Mai showed him. These were things Tuan had never known since losing his parents, but when he met Madame Mai's gentle gaze, so much like the mother he had lost, and heard Mr. Huang's kind words, "Please, think of this as your home," Tuan couldn't refuse. He nodded slightly, yet deep inside, a vague unease stirred within him. On his first day in the mansion, Tuan was awestruck. The ivory white walls shimmered under the glow of a grand crystal chandelier. Thick cream-colored curtains cascaded down, radiating warmth yet feeling so unfamiliar. Everything, from the velvet upholstered chairs in the living room to the gleaming silverware on the dining table, was a stark contrast to the rickety riverside shack he had once called home. Each day, a lavish feast was laid out on the long wooden dining table. The meticulously plated dishes, resembling intricate paintings, were completely foreign to him. Sitting before them, Tuan felt only a tightness in his throat. Sometimes he forced himself to swallow a few bites to avoid Madame Mai's concerned gaze, then quietly excused himself, retreating to the room they had prepared for him. The bed was so soft that he didn't dare lie down fully, as if he were unworthy of touching such luxury. Each night, under the dim glow of the bedside lamp, Tuan curled up at the edge of the bed, his heart heavy with emotions. He longed for the riverside, the gentle lapping of waves, the familiar scent of damp earth as he waded through the mud, searching for plastic bottles. He missed the vast night sky, where even the faintest moonlight was enough to illuminate an entire world of hardship. There, despite the struggles, had once been his home. Despite the harshness of his past life, Tuan had always felt free. He had always felt like he belonged. Now, standing inside this grand mansion, everything felt unfamiliar, like a beautiful dream, yet one that left him feeling lost. The only thing keeping him here, the only thing easing the unease in his heart, was Nam, the fragile little boy he had once saved. Day by day, Nam grew stronger, his cheeks rosy, his bright eyes reflecting the vast sky. Every time he laughed, that pure, joyful sound seemed to shatter the invisible walls within Tuan's heart. Each time he held Nam in his arms, Tuan couldn't help but remember that rainy afternoon, the moment he found the baby in a tattered basket, those tiny helpless eyes gazing up at him, silently pleading for protection. Tuan spent hours playing with Nam, doing everything he could to make him laugh. He told him little stories about the river, about the days when the two of them lived in a crumbling shack by the water. He wasn't sure if Nam could understand any of it, but whenever he saw the child's innocent gaze, it felt as though he was speaking to a part of his own past, a piece of his life he never wanted to lose. Yet, every small joy came with an undercurrent of doubt. Tuan knew he was living under the kindness of Monsieur Huang and Madame Mai, but did he truly belong here? Sometimes, he overheard the hushed whispers of the house staff, the murmurs about his background. How could a boy like him him ever fit into this family. Though no one ever said it to his face, those words cut deep, silent wounds that made him retreat further into himself. Still, Tuấn kept going, for Nam, for the unwavering trust in Nam's eyes whenever he looked at him. No matter how unfamiliar or difficult life in this luxurious mansion was, Nam was the reason he had to keep moving forward. Nam wasn't just a little brother he had saved, he was the only connection Tuấn had to this new family. And every time he held Nam close, Tuấn reminded himself, no matter how hard it gets, I won't give up. I won't give up on Nam. I won't give up on this chance to build a new life, even though the road ahead was still full of challenges waiting in the shadows. That night, the sky was shrouded in thick, ominous clouds. The moonlight, dim and weak, seemed to be swallowed by the overwhelming darkness. The mansion stood silent, undisturbed, with only the faint whispers of the wind seeping through the grand windows. But in that eerie stillness, no one knew that danger was lurking just outside. Bad Dung, the woman who had once kidnapped Anne, was back, fueled by hatred. Her initial plan had failed, but the bitterness of losing her chance to extort a ransom still burned within her. This time, she wasn't just after Anne. She wanted revenge. Along with her accomplices, she had planned everything carefully, waiting for the dead of night to strike. As the clock ticked past midnight, they crept over the mansion's towering fence, moving swiftly through the shadows. The darkness cloaked their every movement, making them invisible. One of them skillfully picked the lock of a ground floor window, silently granting entry to the entire group. Without a sound, they split up, each heading toward their target. Step by step, they advanced toward Anne's room. Inside his own small room, as always, Tuấn never slept deeply, because deep inside, there was always a sense of unease lingering within him. It was a habit ingrained from the days by the river, where even the faintest sound could signal danger. Tonight, in his restless sleep, Tuấn suddenly jolted awake. A sound, soft, faint, the creaking of a window. He sat up, ears straining against the silence. Something was wrong. Silently, Tuấn slipped out of bed, his bare feet barely making a sound against the cool wooden floor as he stepped into the dark hallway. Everything was cloaked in shadows, but in the distance, a figure, a dark silhouette flickered near Anne's room. Tuán's heart clenched. No hesitation, he bolted forward, breath unsteady but steps firm. As he neared the doorway, he saw it. The door was slightly ajar, and inside, a shadow moved near Anne's crib. Tuấn didn't think. He lunged forward, shouting, "Who's there?" His voice shattered the silence. The intruder flinched, startled. In that split second, Tuán's hand shot out, slamming against the emergency alarm button on the wall. A piercing siren ripped through the mansion, its shrill wail echoing in every corridor. Emergency lights flared, casting an unforgiving glow over the scene and revealing the sharp, menacing face of one of Ba Dung's accomplices. The man lunged at Tuấn, trying to silence him, but Tuán swiftly dodged, his voice ringing out, "Help! Intruder!" The alarm sent a shockwave through the house. Footsteps thundered. The security team burst in, moving fast. The intruder struggled, attempting to flee, but he didn't get far. Within moments, they had him pinned to the ground. Amid the chaos, Ba Dung and another accomplice realized the plan had failed. They had no choice. Slipping back into the shadows, they fled through the window. The noise had woken Anne. He wailed in his crib, frightened. Tuấn rushed forward, scooping him up, holding him close, whispering words of comfort. But his eyes remained locked on the window, watching as the night swallowed the figures that had just escaped. Even though the situation had been temporarily brought under control, Tuấn couldn't stop himself from trembling. Fear still wrapped around him, an invisible force that refused to let go. Mr. Huang and Mrs. Mai rushed in, their faces etched with worry. "What happened?" Mr. Huang asked, his voice trembling with concern. Tuấn recounted everything, every single detail. Their expressions shifted from shock to sheer disbelief. "We cannot let this happen again," Mr. Huang said, his eyes darkening with determination. The security team assured them that the immediate threat had been handled, but Tuấn knew the truth. Ba Dung wasn't finished yet. Darkness still lurked in the shadows. And now, not just Annem too had become a target. Tuấn silently vowed to himself, "No matter what it takes, I will protect Nam. No matter the danger, I won't let them take him away again." In the days following the break-in, despite the tightened security, an unshakable feeling gnawed at Tuấn that the danger wasn't truly over. One afternoon, while clearing out old belongings in the backyard, he stumbled upon a crumpled piece of paper. Scrawled hastily across it were vague sentences, but one phrase stood out: "Next plan." And a name: Lamb. It meant nothing to Tuấn, yet something deep inside told him this was no coincidence. From that moment on, his senses sharpened. He watched everything, listened to every whisper. Then, one day, standing on the second-floor balcony, Tuấn overheard a voice he recognized. Ba Dung. The kidnapper still on the loose. She was speaking on the phone with someone just beyond the back fence of the estate. Her voice was hushed, urgent, laced with frustration. Tuấn held his breath. He listened, careful not to make a sound. I did everything you asked, but everything fell apart because of that kid. Ba Dong's voice was filled with rage. Mr. Lam, you promised to handle the rest. Don't make me take all the blame alone. The name Lam resurfaced, but this time he wasn't just a name. He was the mastermind behind everything. Tuấn heart pounded in his chest, but he forced himself to stay calm. Lowering himself cautiously, he discreetly took out his phone and recorded the entire conversation. When Ba Dong ended the call and disappeared into the dark alley, Tuấn watched her go, a growing unease swelling in his chest. Tuấn took the recording and the crumpled note he had found earlier to Mr. Huang. After listening to Tuấn account and reviewing the evidence, Mr. Huang fell silent. Lam, he muttered, his face darkening. It's him, isn't it? Mr. Huang explained that Mr. Lam had once been his greatest rival in the business world. They had deep-seated conflicts, so it wasn't surprising that Lam would seek revenge. Now, with undeniable proof in hand, the family decided to collaborate with the police to expose the entire scheme. The plan was set into motion in absolute secrecy. With Tuán's help, the police devised a trap to lure both Ba Dong and Mr. Lam into the open. One evening, Tuán pretended to take a casual stroll around the estate, creating the perfect opportunity for Ba Dong to trail him. Meanwhile, the police were strategically positioned, waiting for the right moment to catch them red-handed. Ba Dong believed this was her best chance to get close to Nam. She slipped into the back garden, but this time, every move she made was already accounted for. The tension peaked when Ba Dong secretly met with Mr. Lam at a hidden location to discuss their plans. Tuán and the police watched silently from the shadow, a direct confession. The incriminating audio recording. It was everything they needed. The truth was finally about to be revealed. As the police stormed in, Ba Dong screamed in resistance, struggling in vain. Even Mr. Lam, usually composed and powerful, could no longer maintain his cold facade. You will all pay for this, he roared, but the panic in his eyes betrayed his words. The police swiftly cuffed both of them, putting an end to the days of fear that had loomed over Mr. Huang's family. When everything settled down, Tuấn stood silently in the courtyard. The soft glow from the living room lights cast long shadows, making him seem smaller than ever. Mr. Huang approached, resting a hand on his shoulder. Tuán, you saved this family. Once again. His voice was low, yet filled with emotion. Without you, we wouldn't have made it through this danger. Ba Mai stepped forward, tears welling in her eyes. Thank you, Tuán. You didn't just save Nam, you protected all of us. This family wouldn't be whole without you. Tuấn lowered his head. His eyes glimmered with emotion, but also with determination. I only did what I had to do. His voice was soft, yet firm, but deep down he knew. It was love and courage that had carried him through his fears. Ba Dong and Mr. Lam had been arrested. Mr. Huang's family had finally found peace once more. But more than that, they had found something else in Tuán. Not just a savior, but family. A son they loved as their own. In the warm glow of that evening, Tuán realized something profound. He had found where he truly belonged. After all the turmoil, life gradually returned to peace, but this time peace held a whole new meaning. No longer the lonely nights by the riverside, but mornings filled with laughter. In his new home, where he was cherished and accepted as a true member of the family. Mr. Huang, once a stern and busy man, now spent more time with Tuán. During their quiet moments, he would tell Tuán stories of his difficult youth, when he had to struggle with nothing but his own two hands to build a life. Tuán, do you know... His voice was deep yet warm, carrying the weight of experience. Those years of hardship taught me to cherish every opportunity and every kind person who helped me. And when I look at you, I see myself, strong and courageous. His stories were not just lessons, but a bridge, allowing Tuán to feel the deep empathy and closeness that Mr. Huang had for him. Ba Mai, Tuán's new mother, cared for him as if he were her own son. She noticed every little detail. What foods he liked, how she would gently fold the shirt he had carelessly left on a chair. She often encouraged Tuán to share his thoughts, even the difficult memories he had never told anyone. You don't have to hide your sadness, she said softly, her eyes filled with warmth. This family is a place where you should always feel safe. And then there was Nam, the little boy Tuán had saved, now growing up in the loving embrace of the family. His bright eyes sparkled every time he looked at Tuán, filled with admiration and unwavering trust. Nam followed Tuán everywhere, clinging to him like a shadow. During their playful moments, the sound of Nam's carefree laughter filled Tuán's heart with a strange warmth. Tuán, you're my hero, Nam would often say, and every time Tuán would simply smile, his eyes betraying a hint of shyness, yet overflowing with happiness. Even in moments of peace, Tuấn could never forget the days by the riverside where he grew up amidst poverty and hardship. It was a place that tested him, but it also taught him how to survive and love. He remembered the mornings wading through the muddy waters of the LNH River, the meager meals barely enough to fill his stomach, and the nights spent shivering in a tattered shack. But above all, he remembered the gaunt faces of the children like himself, those he had come to see as family. They had shared every crumb of bread, every fragile dream in the harshness of life. Those memories were not a burden, but a driving force, urging Tuấn to do something meaningful. He could never forget the place where he once belonged. Each time he watched Nam sleeping peacefully in his arms, he wondered how many other children out there were still waiting for a chance to be loved and saved. One afternoon, as the golden hues of the setting sun bathed the wide courtyard in warmth, Tuấn approached Uncle Hoang. With a firm yet emotional voice, he spoke. "Uncle Hoang, I want to do something for the poor children by the river. I want them to have the same chance to change their lives that I was given." Uncle Hoang remained silent for a moment before placing a hand on Tuán's shoulder, his gaze filled with pride. "You are a special child, Tuán, and I believe that with your heart you will accomplish this. Our family will always support you." At that moment, a new fire ignited within Tuán, a fire of hope and compassion. He was no longer the lonely boy by the river. Now, he was part of a family, and more importantly, he carried within him a mission. To help those who, like him, had once struggled through life's hardships. The days ahead would not be easy, but Tuấn was ready to face them. Tuấn knew that with the love he had received, he was ready to face any challenge. That night, he sat quietly on the balcony of the mansion, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. The sky was moonless, with only a few faint stars scattered across the silent darkness, mirroring the deep thoughts in his heart. Since the day he was adopted by Uncle Hoang's family, Tuán's life had completely changed. Though he was surrounded by the warmth of a wealthy and loving family, he could never forget the memories of those freezing nights by the river, the exhausting days spent struggling to survive in poverty. He remembered the children who once ran alongside him by the riverbank, their thin faces, their eyes still shining with longing. He recalled the small hands desperately digging through the muddy banks, hoping to find something of value to exchange for a few coins. Those memories clung to him, a constant reminder that thousands of children out there were still living as he once had, without hope, without shelter, without a future. "I can't just stand by and watch," Tuấn told Uncle Hoang one afternoon, as the golden light of the setting sun stretched across the courtyard. "I want to do something for the children by the river. I want them to have the same chance to change their lives as I did." Uncle Hoang remained silent for a moment, his eyes filled with pride and emotion. "You are a special child, Tuấn. I believe that with your heart, you will accomplish this. Our family will always stand by you." With the support of Uncle Hole and Aunt Mai, Tuấn set out to establish a center for underprivileged children. The early days were anything but easy. He had to meet with numerous sponsors, share his story, and persuade them to join his cause. Facing skeptical glances and tough questions was not something he was accustomed to, but Tuấn knew that if he wanted to fulfill his mission, he had to press on with unwavering determination. Tuấn refused to give up. At every meeting, he shared his story, about the days he spent living by the river, about the first time he saw Nam lying in an old basket amidst the pouring rain. Every word he spoke came from the heart, and it was this sincerity that moved people, persuading them to support his cause. On the day the center was completed, Tuấn stood in front of the newly built structure, an unfamiliar feeling swelling within him. The building wasn't large, but every brick, every window held special meaning. This was more than just a shelter. It was a symbol of hope, a place where children like him could find refuge and a chance to transform their lives. The opening ceremony was solemn yet warm. The first children welcomed to the center stood around, their eyes shimmering like stars. Tuấn stepped onto the podium, gazing at their faces, his heart overflowing with emotion. "I was once a child without a home, without hope," he began, his voice strong yet slightly trembling with emotion. "I once believed my life would remain trapped in darkness, with no way out. But then, strangers extended their hands to help me. They gave me a chance, faith, and love. Today, I want to take what I've been given and pass it on to other children, so they know that no matter how hard life gets, they can still find the light." Applause erupted, but Tuấn barely noticed. His eyes remained fixed on the children before him, where he saw a glimmer of light, the very light he had once longed for. He knew that this was only the beginning of a much greater journey. Tuấn knew that the road ahead would be full of challenges, but he was ready to face them all. As the ceremony came to an end, he stood quietly in the courtyard of the center, bathed in the soft glow of the building's lights. Uncle Hoang approached, placing a firm yet gentle hand on his shoulder. "You did it, Tuấn. You didn't just change your own life, you've changed the lives of so many others." Aunt Mai stepped forward, holding little Nam's hand. Now a strong and energetic boy, he looked up with bright eyes. She smiled, her gaze filled with warmth and pride. Tuấn knelt down, opening his arms to embrace Nam. He held him close, feeling the warmth of his small body. Nam was not just the little brother he had saved. He was the one who had changed Tuán's life. the bridge that had led him to family and to the true meaning of life. The lights from the center illuminated their faces, a silent promise that love and hope would continue to shine no matter the hardships of life. From an orphan boy by the river, Tuấn had become a symbol of courage, resilience, and the desire to uplift those less fortunate. But above all, he had found where he truly belonged, not just in a family, but in a lifelong mission worth pursuing. Dear friends, thank you for taking the time to listen to this heartfelt story. We hope it has not only touched your hearts, but also offered valuable lessons on kindness, courage, and hope, universal values that we can all share and spread. To continue supporting our channel, you can take simple yet meaningful actions. Like this video, leave a comment to share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another inspiring story. Your support is our motivation to bring you more meaningful stories. Thank you sincerely, and we wish you health, happiness, and endless joy in life.